Before the dawn of consciousness itself, before the first whisper of thought echoed through the infinite expanse, before even the concept of before held meaning in any comprehensible framework, there existed only Ginnungagap, the yawning void, the primordial abyss, the cosmic womb from which all possibility would eventually emerge. This was not mere emptiness, not simple absence of matter or energy, but rather a pregnant nothingness that contained within its unfathomable depths the seeds of every reality that would ever manifest across infinite dimensions of existence. The void pulsed with potential, vibrating at frequencies that transcended physical measurement, resonating with the unborn harmonies of creation itself. Within this boundless chasm, two opposing forces maintained their eternal vigil at opposite extremes of the cosmic spectrum. To the south blazed Muspelheim, the realm of primordial fire, where flames burned with such intensity that they consumed the very concept of temperature, where heat transcended physical properties to become a fundamental force of transformation and creative destruction. These were not ordinary flames that merely oxidized matter, but cosmic fires that could ignite consciousness itself, that could burn through the barriers between possibility and actuality, that could forge new realities from the raw substance of pure potential. The flames danced with sentient awareness, each flicker containing within it the blueprint for entire universes, each spark carrying the genetic code of civilizations yet unborn. To the north lay Niflheim, the realm of eternal ice, where cold achieved such absolute perfection that it froze not merely matter but time itself, where frost crystals formed patterns that encoded the mathematical foundations of existence, where glaciers moved with the inexorable patience of entropy itself. This was not simple absence of heat, but rather the presence of a fundamental force that sought to preserve, to crystallize, to maintain perfect stasis against the chaotic transformations threatened by its fiery counterpart. The ice possessed its own form of consciousness, a slow and patient awareness that measured time in eons and contemplated existence with the serene detachment of absolute zero. The collision between these primordial opposites occurred not through deliberate action, but through the inevitable mathematics of cosmic geometry. As the scorching winds of Muspelheim extended their reach across the void, and as the bitter frost of Niflheim crept southward with glacial determination, the two forces met in the heart of Ginnungagap. The resulting interaction transcended simple physical reaction. This was the first act of creation, the initial synthesis that would establish the pattern for all subsequent existence. Where fire met ice, neither force achieved dominance. Instead, they merged into something entirely new, something that partook of both natures while transcending the limitations of either. From this cosmic synthesis emerged Ymir, known also as Argelmir, the first being, the primordial giant whose very existence embodied the fundamental paradox of creation itself. His form defied conventional description, for he was simultaneously solid and fluid, hot and cold, ordered and chaotic. His body contained within it the undifferentiated potential of all future creation, mountains that had not yet risen, oceans that had not yet flowed, skies that had not yet opened above the earth. He was not merely large in the physical sense. His magnitude operated across multiple dimensions of existence, his presence extending through layers of reality that would not be fully differentiated until long after his death. As Ymir slumbered in the primordial void, his body became a factory of spontaneous generation, producing life through processes that operated outside any biological framework that would later evolve. From beneath his left armpit emerged the first male and female giants, born not through any reproductive process, but through the sheer creative overflow of his primordial essence. These beings possessed consciousness, but lacked the structured awareness that would characterize later forms of intelligence. They were raw sentience given form. pure awareness without the filtering mechanisms of ego or identity. His legs, moving against each other in the restless sleep of cosmic dreaming, generated another giant offspring through friction that was simultaneously physical and metaphysical. This being emerged from the interaction of opposing forces within Ymir's own body, embodying the principle that creation requires tension, that new existence springs from the dynamic interaction of complementary opposites. These first-generation giants possessed neither the ordered nature that would later characterize the gods, nor the structured societies that humans would eventually develop. They existed instead as pure embodiments of primal energy, as living manifestations of the chaotic forces that preceded all attempts at cosmic organization. Simultaneously with Ymir's emergence, the cosmic cow Odumbla materialized from the melting ice, her appearance representing another aspect of the primordial creative process. She was not merely an animal but a cosmic principle given bovine form, a nurturing force that would sustain the first giant while simultaneously bringing forth the ancestor of the gods. Her 4 rivers of milk flowed with supernatural abundance, each stream possessing different properties that corresponded to fundamental aspects of existence. One provided physical sustenance, another granted wisdom, the third bestowed strength, and the fourth contained the essence of consciousness itself. Odumla's own sustenance came from licking the salty ice blocks that filled Ginnungagap, her tongue gradually revealing what had been hidden within the frozen depths. This was not random action but purposeful excavation, a deliberate uncovering of the next phase of cosmic development. Her persistent licking, continuing across 3 full days and nights, gradually revealed first the hair, then the head, and finally the complete form of Buri, the ancestor of the gods. His emergence marked the introduction of a new principle into the cosmos, the concept of imposed order, of deliberate structure, of conscious organization applied to the raw materials of existence. Buri's appearance contrasted sharply with Ymir's chaotic magnificence, where the primordial giant embodied undifferentiated potential. Buri possessed defined features, clear boundaries, and purposeful intent. He was beautiful in a way that suggested conscious design rather than spontaneous emergence, his form reflecting principles of symmetry and proportion that would later be codified into aesthetic laws. His very existence introduced the concept of should be into a cosmos that had previously known only is, the idea that existence could be evaluated against standards, that some forms might be preferable to others, that consciousness could impose its preferences upon the raw materials of reality. Buri's son Bor would eventually marry Bestla, a giantess and daughter of the giant Bullthorn, establishing the crucial genealogical link between the giant and divine races that would influence the entire structure of Norse cosmology for all subsequent ages. This union represented more than mere political alliance or romantic attraction. It was a fundamental synthesis of opposing cosmic principles, a merger of chaos and order that would produce offspring capable of reshaping the entire cosmos according to their vision. The children of this union, Odin, Vili, and Ve, would inherit characteristics from both lineages, possessing the creative chaos of their giant ancestry alongside the organizing impulse of their divine heritage. The term Jotun itself derives from the Old Norse word meaning devourer or glutton, reflecting the giant's association with consumption and the raw forces of nature that consume and transform all they encounter. However, this etymology reveals only one aspect of their complex nature. The classification of these primordial beings proves far more sophisticated than a single designation might suggest, encompassing multiple categories that reflect different aspects of the chaotic forces that preceded and challenged divine order. The JOTNAR proper constituted the most ancient and powerful of these beings, descended directly from Ymir's body, and possessing intimate connections to the fundamental forces of creation. These giants often displayed wisdom and knowledge that rivaled or exceeded that of the gods themselves, having existed since the cosmos's very beginning and having witnessed the unfolding of cosmic history from its first moments. They inhabited Jotunheimer, though their influence extended throughout all the 9 worlds, and their relationships with the gods ranged from bitter enmity to complex alliances sealed through marriage and mutual benefit. The Thursar, meanwhile, represented a more specifically threatening aspect of giant kind. The term Thurs carries connotations of demonic or malevolent supernatural beings, and these giants often appeared in the sources as more actively hostile to both gods and humans. While sharing the same fundamental nature as the JOTNAR, the Thursar seem to embody the more destructive and chaotic aspects of the primordial forces, actively seeking to undermine the order established by divine will, rather than simply existing as alternative expressions of cosmic possibility. The Hrimthursar formed another classification, the frost giants, who embodied the preserving and crystallizing aspects of primordial cold. These beings possessed the ability to freeze not merely physical matter, but also time itself, creating zones of temporal stasis where change became impossible, and entropy achieved perfect stillness. Their magic operated through manipulation of fundamental thermodynamic principles, convincing heat energy to abandon matter, and allowing absolute zero to assert its dominion over localized regions of space-time. From these various classifications emerged the concept that would eventually develop into the medieval and later understanding of trolls. The Old Norse troll initially served as a general term for supernatural beings possessing magical powers, particularly those associated with the wild, untamed aspects of nature. This terminology encompassed not only giants, but also various other supernatural entities, reflecting the fluid nature of Norse supernatural classification systems and the recognition that rigid categories often failed to capture the complex reality of beings who existed at the boundaries between different states of existence. The cosmic role of the giants extended far beyond simple antagonism toward the gods, while later sources often portrayed them primarily as enemies to be defeated or obstacles to be overcome. The earliest materials reveal their fundamental importance to the very structure of existence itself. The giants represented the forces of entropy and dissolution that balanced the gods' ordering principles, ensuring that the cosmos remained dynamic rather than static, that change remained possible rather than being frozen into eternal perfection that would ultimately prove sterile and lifeless. Ymir's death, at the hands of Odin and his brothers Vili and Vi, provided the raw materials for creating the 9 worlds. But this act of cosmic construction required the destruction of the primordial giant. His blood became the seas and rivers, flowing with the same chaotic energy that had animated his living form. His flesh formed the earth, retaining the capacity for spontaneous generation that had characterized his body. His bones created the mountains, their structure encoding the fundamental patterns that would govern geological processes throughout cosmic history. His skull became the dome of the sky, its interior surface reflecting the consciousness that had once resided within. The maggots that emerged from his decaying flesh were transformed by divine will into the dwarves, who would craft the most powerful artifacts in Norse mythology, their skills reflecting their origin in the body of the first being. This creation myth establishes the giants not as external enemies, but as the fundamental substrate from which all existence springs. Every mountain contains within it the essence of Ymir's bones. Every ocean carries his blood. Every handful of soil partakes of his flesh. The world itself is the body of the first giant, transformed but not destroyed, reorganized but not eliminated. This understanding would profoundly influence how later giants understood their relationship to the physical world. They were not merely inhabitants of the earth but its relatives, sharing a common ancestor with every rock and river. The surviving giants, led by Bergelmir, who escaped the flood of Ymir's blood by climbing into a hollowed tree trunk with his wife, established themselves in Jotunheimer and continued their cosmic role as representatives of the chaotic forces that preceded divine order. Their ongoing existence ensured that the tension between order and chaos would persist throughout the cosmos's history, driving the dynamic processes that sustained all life and change. Bergelmir's survival was not accidental but necessary. The cosmos required the continued presence of beings who embodied the primordial forces, who could serve as living connections to the creative chaos from which all existence had emerged. The genealogical connections between giants and gods created a complex web of relationships that defied simple categorization and challenged any attempt to draw clear boundaries between the forces of order and chaos. These bloodline connections were not mere historical curiosities, but active forces that shaped the capabilities, motivations, and destinies of the beings who carried mixed heritage. The intermingling of divine and giant ancestry created individuals who embodied the fundamental tensions that drove cosmic development, whose very existence represented the synthesis of opposing principles. Odin's mother, Bestla, linked the chief of the Aesir directly to giant lineage, while his brothers Vili and Ve shared this mixed heritage. This divine giant ancestry meant that the gods themselves carried within them the same primordial forces they sought to order and control, creating an internal tension that would ultimately contribute to their downfall at Ragnarok. Odin's pursuit of wisdom, his willingness to sacrifice himself to himself, his constant seeking after knowledge that might prevent or postpone the prophesied doom, all these characteristics reflected his giant heritage, the chaotic curiosity and boundary-crossing nature that he had inherited from his mother's lineage. Frigg, Odin's wife and queen of the gods, also possessed giant ancestry through various lineages, as did many other significant divine figures. Her prophetic abilities, her knowledge of all fates even though she spoke none of them aloud, her understanding of the web of word that connected all beings. These capabilities stemmed from her giant bloodline, from ancestors who had witnessed the cosmos's birth and who understood the patterns that governed its development. Her silence regarding the fates she foresaw reflected the giant understanding that knowledge of the future carried responsibilities that often required restraint rather than revelation. Thor's mother, Jord, represented the earth itself, a fundamental force that predated divine ordering and that would persist beyond any particular cosmic cycle. Her union with Odin produced a son who combined divine purpose with terrestrial power, whose strength derived not merely from his Aesir heritage, but from his connection to the physical world itself. Thor's ability to channel the earth's power through his hammer, his capacity to generate earthquakes through his footsteps, his intimate connection to the storms that shaped the landscape, all these reflected his giant mother's influence, her gift of connection to the fundamental forces that animated the physical world. Freyr would eventually marry the giantess Gerdur, and Njordr had earlier been married to Skadi, daughter of the giant Thjazi. These unions produced offspring who inherited characteristics from both divine and giant lineages, creating beings who embodied the synthesis of order and chaos. The children of such marriages often possessed abilities that exceeded those of either parent, their mixed heritage allowing them to access powers and perspectives that pure-blooded beings of either lineage could not achieve. The giants possessed knowledge and wisdom that often exceeded that of the gods, particularly regarding the cosmos's ultimate fate. Vafthrudnir, the wise giant whom Odin challenged to a contest of knowledge, demonstrated understanding of cosmic history and future, that rivaled even the All-Father's accumulated wisdom. His knowledge encompassed not merely facts, but deep comprehension of the principles that governed cosmic development, the patterns that repeated across different scales of existence, the fundamental laws that even the gods could not violate without triggering catastrophic consequences. Similarly, the giant Mimir guarded the well of wisdom beneath Yggdrasil's roots, possessing knowledge so valuable that Odin sacrificed his eye to drink from it. This superior wisdom stemmed from the giant's primordial nature and their direct connection to the fundamental forces of existence. Having emerged from Ginnungagap itself, they possessed intimate understanding of the cosmos's underlying structure and the forces that could ultimately bring about its transformation and renewal. Their knowledge encompassed not only the past and present, but also the future, including the details of Ragnarok and the subsequent rebirth of the world. The giants' physical characteristics varied enormously throughout the sources, reflecting their diverse origins and natures. Some possessed humanoid forms of enormous size, capable of interacting normally with gods and humans despite their scale. These giants could walk among other beings, participate in social gatherings, and engage in diplomatic negotiations, their size being merely a matter of degree rather than kind. Others displayed more monstrous or elemental characteristics, embodying specific natural forces or phenomena in ways that made conventional social interaction impossible or dangerous. The giant Utgarda Loki, for instance, could manipulate size and perception itself, creating illusions that challenged even Thor's mighty strength and revealing the subjective nature of physical reality. His magic operated not through crude deception, but through sophisticated manipulation of the relationship between consciousness and perceived reality, demonstrating that what beings experienced as objective physical facts were actually interpretations that could be altered by those who understood the mechanisms of perception. His challenges to Thor and his companions revealed that strength, speed, and skill were not absolute qualities, but relative measurements that depended upon the framework within which they were evaluated. Mountain giants possessed bodies of living stone and earth, their forms blending seamlessly with the landscape they inhabited. Their movements could trigger avalanches and earthquakes, while their breathing created the winds that swept across high peaks. These beings were not merely large humanoids made of rock, but actual geological formations that had achieved consciousness, mountains that could think and act while maintaining their fundamental nature as parts of the earth itself. Their timescale operated on geological rather than biological rhythms, their thoughts unfolding over centuries, their decisions requiring decades of contemplation. Frost giants embodied the bitter cold of winter, their presence bringing blizzards and ice storms, while their breath could freeze rivers and lakes solid. Their bodies maintained temperatures far below what conventional matter could achieve, their cells operating through quantum processes that allowed them to function at near absolute zero. The frost that formed in their wake was not ordinary ice, but crystallized time itself, each snowflake containing within it a frozen moment that could be preserved indefinitely or released to resume its flow through the temporal stream. Fire giants from Muspelheim radiated intense heat that could melt stone and metal, their very existence threatening to consume the ordered world through flame and destruction. These beings were not merely hot, but were actual embodiments of combustion itself, their bodies consisting of controlled nuclear fusion that generated temperatures comparable to stellar cores. They could walk through solid rock as easily as humans moved through air, their passage leaving behind tunnels of molten stone that would eventually cool into new geological formations. The descendants of these primordial forces organized themselves into distinct clans that would shape the cosmic order for millennia to come. Following Bergelmir's survival of the great deluge that drowned most of his kin in Ymir's blood, the giant populations gradually rebuilt their numbers and established complex family structures throughout Jotunheimr. These bloodlines carried within them specific aspects of the original chaos, each clan developing particular affinities for different elemental forces and cosmic principles. The most ancient of these lineages traced their descent directly from Ymir's body, claiming inheritance of his primordial power and knowledge. Bergelmir himself founded what became known as the Bergelmirlings, giants who possessed deep understanding of survival and adaptation, having witnessed firsthand the cosmos's capacity for sudden catastrophic change. This clan developed particular expertise in prophecy and foresight, their members often serving as oracles who could perceive the threads of fate that bound all existence together. From Bergelmir's offspring emerged numerous subclans, each adapting to different aspects of the giant realm. The Thrymlings, descended from the giant Thrymar who would later steal Thor's hammer, specialized in metalworking and the crafting of powerful artifacts. Their forges, hidden deep within mountain caverns, produced weapons and tools that rivaled even the dwarves' finest work. The hammering of their anvils created the thunder that rolled across Jotunheimer's peaks, while the smoke from their fires formed the dark clouds that perpetually shrouded their domain. Another significant lineage emerged from the union between giants and the elemental forces themselves. The Aegirlings claimed descent from Aegir, the giant who ruled the seas, and his wife Ran, whose net captured the souls of the drowned. This clan possessed dominion over all waters, from the vast oceans that surrounded Midgard to the smallest mountain streams that carved their way through stone. Their halls lay beneath the waves, constructed from coral and shipwrecks, where they hosted elaborate feasts for gods and giants alike, their hospitality legendary throughout all the 9 worlds. The Jormunlings traced their ancestry to more monstrous origins, claiming kinship with the great serpent Jormungandr and other beings whose forms defied conventional description. These giants often possessed the ability to change their shapes, taking on animal forms, or assuming appearances that reflected their inner nature rather than conforming to external expectations. Their transformations were not mere illusions, but fundamental alterations of their physical being, allowing them to embody different aspects of the natural world as circumstances required. Within Jotunheimr itself, these various clans established territories that reflected their particular natures and abilities. The realm's geography shifted and changed according to the will of its inhabitants, creating a landscape that defied the fixed boundaries found in other worlds. Mountains could relocate themselves overnight, their massive forms moving through the earth like whales through water. Rivers might flow uphill when their giant guardians decreed it, their waters defying gravity through applications of magic that manipulated fundamental forces. Forests could transform into deserts or tundra, based on the seasonal migrations of their supernatural inhabitants, the very climate responding to the presence or absence of particular giant clans. At the heart of this ever-changing realm stood Utgardr, the great stronghold that served as the primary seat of giant civilization. Unlike the golden halls of Asgardr or the ordered settlements of Midgard, Utgardr embodied the giants' fundamental nature as beings of chaos and transformation. Its walls rose from living stone that grew and shifted according to the needs of its inhabitants, while its towers reached heights that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality itself, their peaks extending into dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. The construction of Utgardr defied conventional understanding of architecture and engineering. Its builders had shaped the stronghold, not through the application of tools and manual labor, but through direct manipulation of the fundamental forces that govern matter and energy. The walls possess the strength of mountains, combined with the flexibility of living tissue, allowing them to absorb attacks that would shatter conventional fortifications while maintaining their protective function. They could become transparent to allow observation of approaching visitors, or opaque to provide privacy and security, their properties changing according to the will of the stronghold's master. Within Utgarder's ever-changing halls, the giant clans gathered to conduct their affairs and plan their involvement in cosmic events. The Great Throne Room, where Utgarda Loki held court, could expand to accommodate thousands of giants or contract to create intimate spaces for private council. The floor consisted of polished ice that never melted despite the presence of massive fire pits, while the ceiling opened directly to the sky, allowing the northern lights to dance overhead during important gatherings. This architectural impossibility, ice that coexisted with fire, enclosed spaces that opened to the heavens, reflected the giants' mastery over contradictions, their ability to maintain multiple opposing states simultaneously. The significance of Utgarder extended far beyond its function as a mere fortress or administrative center. The stronghold represented the giants' rejection of the ordered boundaries that defined the other worlds, where Asgarder maintained strict divisions between different areas and functions, and Midgard organized itself according to human social structures. Utgarder embraced fluidity and constant change as fundamental principles of existence. This philosophical difference manifested in the physical relationship between the three great strongholds. Asgarder's walls, built by a giant mason but designed according to divine specifications, created clear separation between the realm of the gods and the chaotic forces that surrounded it. These fortifications served not only as physical barriers, but as symbolic representations of the gods' commitment to maintaining order against the encroaching forces of entropy and dissolution. The walls stood as permanent structures, their stones locked into fixed positions that would not shift or change regardless of circumstances, their very immobility representing the divine preference for stability and predictability. Midgard's boundaries, while less impermeable than those of Asgarder, still reflected human attempts to create safe spaces within a dangerous and unpredictable world. The walls that surrounded human settlements provided protection against both physical threats and supernatural dangers, creating zones of relative stability where human civilization could develop and flourish. These barriers acknowledged the existence of chaos beyond their perimeter, while asserting the possibility of maintaining ordered spaces through collective effort and constant vigilance. Utgarder's approach to boundaries proved fundamentally different from either divine or human models. Rather than creating barriers to exclude external forces, the giant stronghold embraced permeability and constant exchange with its environment. Its walls could become transparent or solid as circumstances required, while its gates opened not just to physical passage, but to the flow of magical energies and supernatural influences that connected all the worlds. This openness reflected the giant's understanding that true strength came not from isolation but from engagement, not from resistance to change, but from the ability to adapt and incorporate new elements into existing structures. The various giant clans within Utgarder organized themselves according to their elemental affinities and ancestral connections, rather than the hierarchical structures favored by gods and humans. The Hrimthursar, or Frost Giants, claimed the northern reaches of the stronghold where eternal winter maintained temperatures that would instantly freeze any mortal visitor. Their halls, carved from solid ice that possessed the hardness of steel, contained libraries where they preserved knowledge written on tablets of frozen mist. These frost giants possessed intimate understanding of winter's power and the transformative effects of extreme cold. Their magic could freeze time itself, creating pockets of temporal stasis where moments stretched into centuries or compressing years into heartbeats. The Hrimthursar served as guardians of memory, preserving in their icy archives the complete history of the cosmos, from its first stirrings in Ginnungagap to the prophesied events of Ragnarok. Every significant event, every important decision, every crucial turning point in cosmic history had been recorded in their crystalline libraries, the information encoded in the molecular structure of ice that would persist until the final conflagration melted all frozen things. The Bergrisar, or mountain giants, established their domain in Utgarder's foundations and the deep caverns that extended far beneath the stronghold's visible structures. These giants possessed bodies of living stone, their skin bearing the patterns of geological strata that recorded the Earth's ancient history. Their movements created the seismic activity that occasionally shook all the worlds, while their breathing patterns influenced the formation of caves and underground passages throughout the cosmos. Within their subterranean halls, the Bergrisar maintained vast workshops where they shaped metals and minerals according to their will. Unlike the dwarves who crafted items through skilled application of tools and techniques, the mountain giants worked directly with the raw materials of creation, convincing stone and metal to assume desired forms through patient negotiation and mutual understanding. They spoke to the consciousness that inhabited all matter, persuading atoms to rearrange themselves, convincing molecules to form new bonds, negotiating with the fundamental forces that govern material existence. The JOTNAR of Muspelheim represented a different category altogether, existing primarily in the realm of fire, while maintaining connections to their kin in Utgarder through magical bonds and shared ancestry. These fire giants embodied the destructive and transformative power of flame. Their very presence was capable of melting the strongest metals and reducing elaborate structures to ash and vapor. Surtur, the greatest of the JOTNAR, wielded a sword that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns, its blade capable of cleaving through the bonds that held the worlds together. His role in the coming Ragnarok would prove decisive, as his flames would consume the world tree itself and clear the way for the cosmos's eventual renewal and rebirth. Surtur had been preparing for this role since the first moments of creation, his entire existence oriented toward the single purpose of bringing about the cosmic transformation that would allow new forms of existence to emerge from the ashes of the old. His sword was not merely a weapon, but a cosmic tool, an instrument of necessary destruction that would serve the greater purpose of renewal. The fire giants' relationship with their frost giant cousins created one of the fundamental tensions that drove cosmic events. Where the Hrimthursar sought to preserve and maintain through the application of freezing cold, the JOTNAR promoted change and transformation through the application of consuming heat. This opposition generated the dynamic forces that sustained all life and prevented the cosmos from falling into either static perfection or complete dissolution. The balance between fire and ice, between transformation and preservation, between change and stability. This was the fundamental dynamic that kept the cosmos alive and evolving. Beyond their roles as elemental forces, the giant clans served as repositories of ancient wisdom and magical knowledge that predated the gods' rise to power. Their libraries contained not only historical records, but also practical instructions for manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. The giants had developed magical techniques that operated according to different principles than those employed by gods or humans, drawing their power directly from the chaotic energies that preceded cosmic order. The educational traditions maintained by the giant clans attracted students from throughout the 9 worlds, including gods who sought to expand their understanding of cosmic principles. Odin himself had studied with giant teachers, learning the secrets of the runes through his ordeal on Yggdrasil, and acquiring knowledge of cider magic from practitioners who had perfected these techniques over countless generations. His willingness to learn from giants, despite the political tensions between Asgardr and Jotunheimer, demonstrated his recognition that wisdom transcended factional boundaries, and that true knowledge required engagement with perspectives that challenged one's existing assumptions. The giant approach to magic emphasized transformation and adaptation, rather than the control and domination favored by divine practitioners, where gods sought to impose their will upon reality through the application of superior power. Giants worked with existing forces and tendencies, guiding natural processes toward desired outcomes through subtle influence and patient cultivation. This philosophical difference extended to their understanding of fate and prophecy. The gods viewed the future as something to be influenced or changed through decisive action, while the giants recognized fate as an expression of fundamental cosmic principles that could be understood but not altered. Their prophetic abilities stemmed from this deeper comprehension of the underlying patterns that governed all existence. Giant seers did not merely predict future events, but understood the causal chains that would inevitably produce those events, the web of interconnected factors that made certain outcomes unavoidable given current conditions. This understanding allowed them to offer counsel that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms, that suggested interventions at crucial leverage points where small changes could produce large effects. The giant clan's role as teachers and challengers created complex relationships with both gods and heroes throughout Norse mythology. They served simultaneously as sources of essential knowledge and as tests that forced their students to confront their own limitations and assumptions. The challenges they presented were not mere obstacles to be overcome, but opportunities for growth and transformation that prepared heroes for their ultimate destinies. A hero who had never faced a giant's riddles would lack the mental flexibility necessary for solving the complex problems that awaited them. A warrior who had never fought a giant would lack the adaptability necessary for surviving encounters with opponents who could change their forms and capabilities mid-battle. The magical prowess of the JOTNAR transcended mere physical strength or elemental control, manifesting through sophisticated supernatural abilities that made them formidable opponents, even to the gods themselves. Among these powers, none proved more versatile or strategically valuable than Hamskipti, the ancient art of shape-changing that allowed giants to assume entirely different forms at will. Unlike the temporary illusions favored by some divine practitioners, giant shape-shifting involved fundamental alterations to their physical being, transforming not just appearance but also capabilities, instincts, and even consciousness patterns. The practice of Hamskipti required intimate understanding of the target form's essential nature. Giants who sought to assume animal shapes needed to comprehend not merely the creature's physical structure, but its behavioral patterns, sensory experiences, and relationship to the natural world. The transformation process began with mental preparation, as the giant gradually aligned their consciousness with that of their chosen form, allowing animal instincts to merge with their supernatural intelligence while maintaining enough self-awareness to control the change and retain the ability to reverse it when necessary. This mental alignment involved more than simple visualization or imagination. The shapeshifter had to achieve genuine empathy with the target form, understanding its experience of the world from the inside rather than merely observing it from without. A giant seeking to become an eagle had to understand what it felt like to ride thermal currents, to perceive the world through eyes that could spot a mouse from a mile away, to experience the predatory focus that narrowed awareness to the single purpose of the hunt. This deep identification with the target form was what made the transformation real rather than illusory, what allowed the shapeshifter to access the genuine capabilities of their chosen form rather than merely appearing to possess them. Master practitioners could shift between multiple forms within moments, adapting to changing circumstances with fluid grace that confounded their opponents. During conflicts with the gods, giants frequently employed rapid transformations to escape seemingly impossible situations, shifting from massive humanoid forms to swift eagles that could soar beyond reach, or dissolving into mist that could seep through the smallest cracks in fortifications. These abilities made them nearly impossible to contain or predict, as conventional tactical approaches proved useless against opponents who could fundamentally alter their nature mid-battle. The most accomplished shapeshifters among the giant clans developed signature forms that reflected their individual personalities and magical specializations. The Jazi, the giant who abducted Idun, possessed particular mastery over eagle transformation. His massive wings were capable of generating hurricane-force winds that could topple trees and scatter enemies across vast distances. His eagle form retained his giant intelligence while gaining access to aerial perspectives and hunting instincts that made him an unparalleled tracker and predator. He could spot a single figure moving across the landscape from heights that would make them invisible to normal vision, and his flight speed allowed him to cross vast distances in hours that would require days of ground travel. Other giants specialized in forms that provided specific tactical advantages. The Rimthurser often assumed the shapes of Arctic wolves, their pack-hunting instincts combining with supernatural endurance to create pursuit capabilities that could track prey across entire realms. These wolf giants possessed enhanced senses that could detect the emotional states of their targets, allowing them to anticipate escape attempts and counter defensive measures with preternatural accuracy. They could smell fear, sense desperation, detect the subtle changes in body chemistry that accompanied decision-making, giving them insights into their prey's intentions before those intentions translated into action. The Bergrizar favored bear transformations that amplified their already formidable physical strength while providing access to the bear's legendary resilience and territorial instincts. Giant bears could hibernate for decades while maintaining awareness of their surroundings, emerging at precisely the right moment to intervene in cosmic events. Their massive claws could tear through divine armor, while their thick fur provided protection against both physical attacks and magical assaults. In bear form, a giant became nearly unstoppable in close combat, their strength sufficient to grapple with gods, their endurance allowing them to sustain injuries that would incapacitate lesser beings. Beyond individual animal forms, some giants mastered elemental transformations that allowed them to become living embodiments of natural forces. Fire giants could dissolve their physical forms entirely, becoming pure flame that could travel through the smallest openings or spread across vast areas with devastating effect. These flame forms retained the giant's consciousness and magical abilities, while gaining immunity to physical attacks and the capacity to ignite anything they touched. A fire giant in flame form could flow through a fortress like water, setting everything ablaze as they passed, their presence turning stone to lava and metal to vapor. Frost giants developed similar techniques for assuming ice and snow forms, their transformed bodies becoming nearly invisible during blizzards, while maintaining the ability to solidify instantly into crushing walls of ice. These transformations proved particularly effective in their native territories, where the abundance of frozen precipitation provided unlimited material for rapid form changes and tactical repositioning. A frost giant could dissolve into a snowstorm, travel miles as scattered flakes, then reconstitute themselves behind enemy lines. their reformation from dispersed particles to solid form occurring too quickly for opponents to react. The magical practice of cider occupied a central position in giant culture, representing their most sophisticated approach to supernatural manipulation and cosmic understanding. This form of magic differed fundamentally from the runic practices favored by gods or the craft-focused techniques employed by dwarves, instead emphasizing intuitive connection to the underlying currents of fate and reality that flowed through all existence. Cider was not about imposing will upon the world, but about perceiving and gently redirecting the flows of probability and causation that determined how events would unfold. Cider practitioners among the giants, known collectively as Sideconur or Volur when referring specifically to female practitioners, developed their abilities through intensive training that began in childhood and continued throughout their extended lifespans. The education process involved learning to perceive the invisible threads that connected all beings and events, understanding how manipulation of these connections could influence outcomes across vast distances and time periods. These threads were not metaphorical, but actual structures in the fabric of reality, subtle energy patterns that linked cause to effect, action to consequence, present to future. The Volur held positions of tremendous respect within giant society, their prophetic abilities making them invaluable advisors to clan leaders and essential participants in major decisions affecting the cosmic balance. These seers possessed the ability to enter trance states that allowed their consciousness to travel along the threads of fate, observing potential futures and past events with equal clarity. Their predictions proved so accurate that even the gods sought their counsel, despite the inherent risks of consulting with beings who represented the chaotic forces they sought to control. Groa, the vulva who attempted to remove the whetstone fragments from Thor's skull, demonstrated the sophisticated healing applications of cider magic. Her techniques involved not merely treating physical wounds, but addressing the spiritual and temporal disruptions that accompanied serious injuries. The magic worked by realigning the victim's personal timeline with their optimal state of health, effectively convincing reality that the injury had never occurred or had already healed completely. This was not simple illusion, but actual manipulation of causality, a rewinding or fast-forwarding of the healing process that would normally require weeks or months. The practice required extensive knowledge of Galder, the vocal component of cider that involved chanting specific sound patterns designed to resonate with cosmic frequencies. These chants could continue for hours or even days, their complex harmonies creating sympathetic vibrations in the fabric of reality itself. Master practitioners could layer multiple Galder sequences simultaneously, weaving intricate magical effects that operated on several levels of existence at once. The sounds were not arbitrary, but precisely calculated to match the vibrational frequencies of the phenomena being manipulated, creating resonance effects that amplified the practitioner's will and allowed it to reshape reality. Cider magic proved particularly effective for long-range influence and subtle manipulation of circumstances. Rather than imposing dramatic changes through brute magical force, Volur preferred to nudge existing trends and tendencies in desired directions, creating chain reactions that would eventually produce their intended outcomes. This approach made their magic extremely difficult to detect or counter, as the effects appeared to result from natural developments rather than supernatural intervention. A vulva might ensure a particular outcome, not by directly causing it, but by arranging circumstances so that it became the most likely result of ordinary actions and decisions. The prophetic aspects of cider involved techniques for accessing the well of fate that lay beneath Yggdrasil's roots, where the Norns wove the threads that determined the destiny of all beings. Volur could project their consciousness to this cosmic nexus, observing the patterns being woven and interpreting their significance for future events. The most skilled practitioners could even perceive multiple potential timelines simultaneously, understanding how different choices and actions might alter the ultimate outcomes. This multi-timeline perception allowed them to offer counsel that addressed not just what would happen, but what could happen, identifying the decision points where intervention might redirect fate toward more favorable outcomes. These prophetic visions often came at significant personal cost, as exposure to the raw forces of fate could damage the seer's sanity or physical health. Many Voller displayed the characteristic signs of their calling: prematurely white hair from glimpsing their own deaths, eyes that reflected the swirling patterns of cosmic fate, or voices that carried echoes of future events. Despite these risks, the knowledge they provided proved so valuable that giant clans competed fiercely to secure the services of accomplished seers, offering substantial compensation and protection in exchange for their prophetic counsel. The berserker transformations practiced by certain giant warriors represented a different application of shape-shifting principles, focusing on psychological and spiritual changes rather than physical form alterations. These warriors learned to suppress their rational minds while amplifying their aggressive instincts and pain tolerance, effectively becoming human-shaped beasts driven by supernatural fury and endurance. The berserker state involved invoking animal spirits, typically bears or wolves, that would possess the warrior's consciousness during combat, granting them access to capabilities that transcended normal biological limitations. This possession provided access to enhanced physical capabilities and tactical instincts, while maintaining enough human intelligence to use weapons and coordinate with allies. The transformation process required extensive preparation, including ritual scarification that created channels for spiritual energy to flow through the body, consumption of specific plant preparations that altered consciousness and reduced inhibitions, and meditation techniques designed to weaken the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The goal was not to become an animal, but to achieve a hybrid state that combined human intelligence with animal ferocity, creating a warrior who could think strategically while fighting with bestial fury. Giant berserkers proved especially formidable opponents due to their supernatural physiology, which amplified the effects of the berserker trance beyond what mortal warriors could achieve. Their enhanced strength could shatter divine weapons, while their pain immunity allowed them to continue fighting despite injuries that would incapacitate normal beings. The combination of giant resilience with berserker fury created warriors who could battle entire armies single-handedly, their presence on the battlefield often determining the outcome of major conflicts. The bear warriors among the giants developed techniques for maintaining partial transformation during combat, allowing them to access unseen strength and claws while retaining human dexterity and weapon skills. These hybrid forms proved particularly effective against heavily armored opponents, as their claws could penetrate divine mail, while their enhanced strength allowed them to wield massive weapons with devastating effect. A bear warrior could tear through shield walls, their claws rending wood and metal as easily as flesh, while their thick fur absorbed blows that would have killed unprotected fighters. Wolf berserkers specialized in pack tactics that combined supernatural coordination with individual ferocity. Groups of these warriors could communicate through subtle body language and scent markers, coordinating complex battle strategies without verbal communication. Their enhanced senses allowed them to detect enemy movements and emotional states, providing tactical advantages that often proved decisive in prolonged engagements. A wolf pack could surround and isolate individual opponents, their coordinated attacks coming from multiple directions simultaneously, their ability to sense fear, allowing them to identify and exploit psychological weaknesses. The Eagle Warriors represented the most elite tier of giant berserkers, their transformations providing access to aerial perspectives and hunting instincts that made them unparalleled scouts and assassins. These warriors could maintain their enhanced perception and reflexes even in human form, their eyes tracking multiple targets simultaneously while their minds processed tactical information with predatory efficiency. An Eagle Warrior could spot vulnerabilities in enemy formations from great distances, identify key targets for elimination, and plan attack routes that exploited terrain features invisible to ground-based observers. The shamanic traditions underlying berserker practices connected directly to the giants' relationship with the natural world and their role as intermediaries between ordered civilization and wild chaos. Giant shamans served as spiritual guides who helped their communities maintain proper relationships with the elemental forces and animal spirits that shared their territories. These shamanic practices involved extensive use of altered consciousness states, achieved through various techniques, including rhythmic drumming that entrained brainwaves to specific frequencies, consumption of psychoactive substances derived from magical plants that grew only in Jotunheimer, and prolonged exposure to extreme environmental conditions that pushed consciousness beyond its normal boundaries. The altered states allowed shamans to communicate directly with animal spirits, negotiate with elemental forces, and perceive the spiritual dimensions that existed parallel to physical reality. Giant shamans often maintained relationships with specific animal guides that provided ongoing counsel and supernatural assistance. These spirit animals were not mere symbolic representations, but actual entities with their own personalities, motivations, and agendas. The relationships required constant maintenance through offerings, ritual observances, and adherence to behavioral restrictions that honored the animal's nature and preferences. The shamanic tradition also encompassed healing practices that addressed spiritual as well as physical ailments. Giant healers understood that many diseases resulted from disruptions in the patient's relationship with natural forces or violations of spiritual taboos. Their treatments involved restoring proper spiritual balance through ritual purification, negotiation with offended spirits, and realignment of the patient's personal energy patterns with cosmic harmonies. A patient suffering from a wasting disease might be treated not with herbs or surgery, but with ceremonies that repaired their damaged relationship with the land spirits whose territory they had violated, or with rituals that appeased the ancestor spirits whose memory they had dishonored. Weather manipulation represented one of the most visible and strategically important applications of giant magic, their abilities in this area stemming from their fundamental connection to the elemental forces that governed atmospheric phenomena. Unlike divine weather control, which typically involved imposing order upon chaotic natural systems, giant weather magic worked by negotiating with and directing existing atmospheric energies toward desired outcomes. The techniques required deep understanding of atmospheric dynamics, combined with the ability to communicate with the spiritual entities that governed wind, rain, snow, and storm systems. Giant weather workers learned to perceive these entities as conscious beings with their own preferences and motivations, approaching them as partners in magical workings rather than forces to be dominated through superior power. A giant seeking to summon rain would not command the clouds to release their moisture, but would negotiate with the rain spirits, offering them something they valued in exchange for their cooperation. This might involve promises of future offerings, agreements to protect certain territories from development, or commitments to perform rituals that honored the spirit's importance and power. Storm calling proved particularly valuable during conflicts, as giant weather workers could summon devastating tempests that disrupted enemy formations while providing cover for their own forces. These magically enhanced storms possessed supernatural intensity that exceeded natural phenomena, their winds capable of lifting armored warriors from their feet, while their lightning struck with pinpoint accuracy guided by the caster's will. The thunder that accompanied these directed strikes carried encoded messages that other giants could interpret across vast distances, creating communication networks that operated independently of conventional methods. The frost giants developed specialized techniques for manipulating winter weather that could extend blizzard conditions far beyond their normal seasonal limits. Their magic could create localized ice ages that persisted for decades, transforming entire regions into frozen wastelands that favored their cold-adapted physiology while hindering warm-blooded opponents. These artificial winter zones operated through manipulation of fundamental thermodynamic principles rather than simple temperature reduction, their effects penetrating deeply enough to alter the spiritual climate of affected regions along with their physical characteristics. Fire giants possessed corresponding abilities for manipulating heat and drought conditions, their magic capable of creating desert conditions in previously temperate regions. These heat waves carried supernatural intensity that could melt metal and stone, while creating atmospheric distortions that confused enemy navigation and communication attempts. The combination of extreme heat with the psychological effects of endless sun and cloudless skies could break the morale of opposing forces, their will to fight evaporating, along with the moisture in their bodies. The fluid boundaries between giant and god found their most complex expression in the figure of Loki, whose very existence challenged the rigid categories that supposedly defined the cosmic order. Born from the union of Farbati, a giant whose name meant cruel striker and whose nature embodied the destructive force of lightning, and Laufey, also called Nal, whose identity as a giantess connected her to the primordial forces of nature. Loki inherited a dual nature that would make him both indispensable to the gods and ultimately their greatest threat. Farbati's lineage traced back to the earliest generations of giants, those beings who emerged from the primordial chaos of Ginnungagap and retained intimate connections to the fundamental forces that preceded divine order. His association with lightning revealed his mastery over one of nature's most unpredictable and destructive phenomena, the sudden electrical discharge that could split trees, ignite fires, or strike down the mightiest warriors without warning. This paternal inheritance granted Loki an innate understanding of sudden transformation and the power to catalyze dramatic changes through seemingly minor actions. Laufey's identity proved more complex, as her alternative name Nal suggested connections to needle-like precision and the ability to pierce through seemingly impenetrable barriers. Some sources described her as a tree or island, indicating her fundamental connection to the earth and growing things, while others emphasized her role as a source of sustenance and shelter. This maternal heritage provided Loki with his shape-shifting abilities and his talent for finding solutions to seemingly impossible problems through unconventional approaches. The circumstances of Loki's adoption into the Aesir reflected the complex political realities that governed relationships between the divine and giant communities. Odin's decision to accept Loki as a blood brother stemmed not from mere friendship, but from recognition of the strategic advantages that such an alliance could provide. Loki's giant heritage granted him access to knowledge and abilities that the gods themselves lacked, while his willingness to work within divine structures made him a valuable intermediary between the ordered realm of Asgardr and the chaotic territories beyond its walls. This blood brotherhood bound Odin and Loki together through magical oaths that transcended normal social relationships, creating obligations and privileges that neither party could easily dissolve. The bond required both participants to share certain risks and benefits, ensuring that Loki's welfare became directly connected to Odin's own survival and success. This arrangement provided Loki with protection against those gods who might otherwise view his giant heritage with suspicion, while granting Odin access to the trickster's unique problem-solving abilities and extensive knowledge of giant culture and capabilities. Loki's position within Asgard remained perpetually ambiguous, as he possessed neither the full rights of a god nor the clear status of an outsider. His presence at divine councils and participation in major decisions reflected his accepted role within the community, yet his methods and motivations often conflicted with divine preferences for direct action and clear moral distinctions. This tension created ongoing friction that would eventually contribute to his transformation from valuable ally to dangerous enemy. The marriages and alliances between gods and giants created a network of relationships that complicated any simple understanding of cosmic conflict between order and chaos. These unions served multiple purposes, establishing political connections that could prevent or resolve conflicts, while also creating offspring who inherited characteristics from both divine and giant lineages. The children of such marriages often possessed abilities that exceeded those of either parent, combining divine focus and purpose with giant adaptability and elemental power. Njordir's marriage to the giantess Skadi exemplified the complex negotiations that characterize divine-giant relationships. The union resulted from compensation agreements following the death of Skadi's father, Thjazi, whom the gods had killed after he abducted Idun and her life-sustaining apples. Rather than accepting simple monetary compensation or seeking immediate revenge, Skadi demanded the right to choose a husband from among the gods, viewing marriage as a means of securing permanent alliance and ensuring her future status within the cosmic hierarchy. The selection process reflected the careful balance of power that governed such arrangements. Skadi could choose her husband only by examining the feet of potential candidates, a restriction that prevented her from making decisions based on obvious indicators of status or attractiveness. Her choice of Njordir, based on his exceptionally beautiful feet, created a union between the Vanir god of seas and winds and the mountain giantess who embodied winter's harsh beauty and unforgiving nature. The marriage faced immediate challenges due to the fundamental incompatibility between their preferred environments. Njordir's connection to the sea required his presence near coastal waters, where he could maintain his divine functions and draw sustenance from maritime energies. Skadi's nature as a mountain giantess bound her to high peaks and snow-covered slopes where she could exercise her dominion over winter weather and alpine wildlife. Their attempted compromise of spending alternating periods in each other's domains proved unsustainable, as neither could fully function when separated from their natural environment. Despite its eventual failure as a romantic partnership, the marriage produced important political and magical consequences. The union established precedents for future divine giant alliances, while demonstrating the practical difficulties of bridging fundamental differences in nature and purpose. Skadi's integration into the divine community, even as a separated wife rather than active spouse, created ongoing connections between Asgard and the giant clans that influenced subsequent diplomatic relationships. The goddess Frigg's own giant ancestry, through various lineages, illustrated the pervasive nature of divine giant intermarriage throughout Norse cosmology. Her connections to giant bloodlines provided her with prophetic abilities that complemented Odin's pursuit of wisdom and knowledge, while her understanding of giant culture and motivations made her a valuable advisor during conflicts or negotiations with giant representatives. These mixed heritages created divine figures who possessed broader perspectives and more nuanced understanding of cosmic relationships than would have been possible through purely divine lineages. Thor's relationship with the giantess Saga produced offspring who inherited both divine strength and giant resilience, creating beings capable of surviving the cosmic destruction of Ragnarok and participating in the subsequent renewal of the world. These children represented the synthesis of opposing forces that would ultimately transcend the limitations of their parent cultures, suggesting that the future cosmos would require integration rather than continued conflict between divine and giant principles. The most dramatic example of boundary-crossing relationships emerged through Loki's union with Angrboda, the giantess whose name meant bringer of grief or herald of sorrow. This partnership produced offspring whose very existence challenged conventional categories and threatened the stability of the cosmic order through their unprecedented combinations of divine intelligence, giant power, and monstrous capabilities that defied classification within existing frameworks. Angrboda herself occupied a unique position within giant society as a practitioner of cider magic, whose abilities exceeded even those of the most accomplished Volur. Her prophetic powers allowed her to perceive the ultimate consequences of her relationship with Loki, understanding that their children would play crucial roles in the cosmic events leading to Ragnarok. Despite this knowledge, she chose to proceed with the union, suggesting that her motivations extended beyond personal desires to encompass larger cosmic purposes that required the existence of these boundary-crossing beings. The forest dwelling that Angrboda established in the eastern regions of Jotunheimr became a sanctuary for magical experimentation and the nurturing of beings whose natures transcended normal categories. Her halls, constructed from living trees that continued to grow and change according to her will, provided environments specifically adapted to the needs of her unusual offspring. The architecture itself reflected the fluid boundaries that characterized her family, with rooms that could expand or contract based on the size requirements of their occupants and passages that connected to distant locations through spatial manipulation techniques. Fenrir, the first of Angrboda's children with Loki, embodied the synthesis of divine intelligence, with lupine instincts and supernatural growth potential that would eventually make him the greatest threat to the gods' continued existence. His early development proceeded at an accelerated pace that alarmed even his divine relatives, his size and strength increasing daily, while his intelligence remained sharp enough to understand the political implications of his existence within Asgardr. The wolf's presence among the gods created ongoing tension, as his rapid growth made it increasingly difficult to maintain the pretense that he posed no threat to divine security. His appetite required constant attention from multiple gods, while his playful interactions with divine artifacts occasionally resulted in damage that revealed his true strength. The gods' growing unease manifested in subtle changes in their behavior around Fenrir, their increasing caution and defensive postures communicating their fears despite their attempts to maintain friendly relations. Fenrir's supernatural intelligence allowed him to perceive these changes in divine attitude, creating a feedback loop that gradually transformed his relationship with his hosts from mutual affection to mutual suspicion. His understanding of the prophecies concerning his role in Ragnarok added another layer of complexity to these interactions, as he possessed knowledge of his destined conflict with Odin while simultaneously experiencing genuine attachment to many of the gods who had raised him. The creation of Gleipnir, the magical chain designed specifically to bind Fenrir, represented the gods' acknowledgement that conventional approaches to the wolf problem had failed. The chain's construction required materials that existed outside normal categories: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These impossible components could only be obtained through negotiations with beings who existed at the boundaries between different realms and categories of existence. Jormungandr, the world serpent, represented an even more dramatic challenge to cosmic stability through his unprecedented size and his position surrounding Midgard in the ocean depths. His growth proceeded at a rate that threatened to disrupt oceanic currents and coastal stability, while his movements created tidal effects that could devastate human settlements. The gods' decision to cast him into the sea reflected their recognition that no terrestrial environment could contain a being of his eventual proportions. The serpent's underwater domain became a parallel realm that existed within, but separate from the normal oceanic environment. His coils created underwater mountain ranges and deep trenches that altered the geography of the sea floor, while his breathing patterns influenced weather systems across all the coastal regions of Midgard. The magical properties of his venom would eventually prove crucial during Ragnarok, when his final battle with Thor would result in mutual destruction that cleared the way for cosmic renewal. Hel, the third of Loki's children with Angerboda, embodied the most complex synthesis of opposing forces through her dual nature as both living goddess and corpse-like ruler of the dead. Her physical appearance reflected this fundamental duality, with half of her body displaying the beauty and vitality associated with divine nature, while the other half showed the decay and dissolution characteristic of death itself. This unique physiology granted her authority over both life and death processes, making her the natural ruler of those who died from disease or old age, rather than in battle. The establishment of Hel's realm in Niflheim created a domain that operated according to principles different from either divine Valhalla or the traditional giant territories. Her halls provided appropriate accommodation for the diverse population of the dead, with environments that could be adjusted to meet the specific needs of different types of deceased souls. The realm's geography included pleasant meadows for those who had lived virtuous lives, alongside darker regions for those whose earthly behavior had created spiritual debts requiring resolution. Hel's administrative approach to ruling the dead reflected her inheritance of both divine organizational skills and giant adaptability to changing circumstances. Her court included representatives from all the 9 worlds, creating a governmental structure that transcended the boundaries between different cosmic realms. The laws that governed her domain addressed the complex relationships between the living and the dead, establishing protocols for communication across the boundary between life and death, while maintaining the fundamental separation that prevented chaos in both realms. The seduction unfolded during the crucial final weeks of the construction project, when every day's work proved essential to meeting the summer deadline. Loki's mare form appeared near the construction site during Svadilfari's rest periods, displaying the behaviors and signals that would attract a stallion's romantic interest. The supernatural horse's response demonstrated the effectiveness of Loki's transformation, as Svadilfari abandoned his construction duties to pursue the mysterious mare, who led him on increasingly distant chases through the forests surrounding Asgardr. Without his equine partner's assistance, the giant's work pace slowed dramatically. The massive stones that had previously moved with supernatural ease now required tremendous physical effort to position, while the complex magical bindings that held the structure together demanded constant attention that prevented him from maintaining his previous construction speed. The architectural details that had distinguished his work suffered as he focused on completing the basic defensive structure within the remaining time. The giant's realization that he would fail to meet the contract deadline triggered a transformation that revealed his true nature as one of the Thursar, the ancient frost giants whose anger could manifest as supernatural winter storms. His rage at the gods' deception created blizzard conditions that threatened to damage the partially completed walls, while his threats of retribution demonstrated the military capabilities that made giant clans formidable opponents even for divine armies. Thor's intervention in the conflict reflected the gods' recognition that diplomatic solutions had failed and that direct action was necessary to resolve the situation. The thunder god's arrival at the construction site coincided with the giant's most violent outburst, his hammer Mjolnir crackling with electrical energy that matched the supernatural storm surrounding the enraged builder. The confrontation that followed demonstrated both Thor's combat prowess and the giant's formidable abilities, their battle creating seismic disturbances that affected the geological stability of the entire region. The giant's death resolved the immediate crisis, but left the gods with partially completed fortifications that required additional work to achieve full defensive capability. The existing walls provided substantial protection against conventional attacks, while the magical bindings that the giant had woven into the structure continued to function according to his original design. However, certain advanced features remained unfinished, creating vulnerabilities that would require divine magic to address through alternative methods. The broader implications of this construction project extended far beyond the immediate security concerns that had motivated the original agreement. The gods had demonstrated their dependence upon giant craftsmanship for projects that exceeded their own technical capabilities, while simultaneously revealing their willingness to use deception and violence when giant expertise threatened to extract payment they considered excessive. This pattern would characterize future divine-giant interactions, creating cycles of cooperation and conflict that shaped cosmic events throughout Norse mythology. The construction of Asgarder's mighty walls stands as perhaps the most revealing example of the complex relationship between divine order and giant craftsmanship. When the gods required fortifications capable of protecting their realm from the chaotic forces that surrounded it, they discovered that their own abilities, while formidable in matters of war and magic, proved insufficient for the massive engineering project they envisioned. The walls needed to withstand not merely physical assault, but magical attacks that could reshape matter at the molecular level, temporal distortions that could age stone to dust in moments, and dimensional intrusions that could bypass conventional barriers entirely. The master builder who approached the gods with his proposal appeared in the form of a weathered giant whose hands bore the calluses of countless construction projects and whose eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone who understood both the theoretical principles and practical challenges of monumental architecture. His clothing, while travel-worn, displayed the fine craftsmanship that marked him as a being of considerable skill and resources. The tools that hung from his belt showed signs of extensive use, but maintained the sharp edges and precise balance that indicated meticulous care and supernatural durability. His proposal seemed almost too generous to accept. The giant offered to construct walls that would surpass anything previously built in any of the 9 worlds, fortifications that would guarantee Asgarder's security against any conceivable threat. The materials would come from his own quarries, the labor would be provided by his own efforts, and the timeline would span merely 3 seasons, from winter's beginning to summer's end. In exchange, he requested only 3 things: the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freyja as his bride. The audacity of these demands revealed the true scope of what the giant proposed to accomplish. The sun and moon represented fundamental cosmic forces whose loss would plunge all the worlds into darkness and temporal chaos. Freyja embodied not merely divine beauty, but the fertility and abundance that sustained life throughout the cosmos. The giant's willingness to accept such payment indicated his confidence that the completed walls would provide value equivalent to these cosmic treasures, suggesting that his architectural vision encompassed more than mere physical fortification. The gods' initial reaction mixed outrage at the presumptuous demands with recognition of their genuine need for the proposed defenses. Recent conflicts with hostile giant clans had demonstrated the vulnerability of their current fortifications, while prophetic warnings suggested that greater threats would soon emerge from the chaotic realms beyond their borders. The master builder's reputation preceded him, as his previous projects had included the reconstruction of mountain ranges after geological catastrophes and the creation of bridges that spanned dimensional gaps between different realms. Loki's intervention in the negotiations demonstrated his unique position as a boundary crosser who understood both divine concerns and giant motivations. His proposed modifications to the original agreement reflected sophisticated understanding of contract law and magical binding principles. By restricting the giants' access to assistance and compressing the timeline to a single winter, Loki created conditions that seemed to make success impossible, while technically honoring the giants' right to attempt the project. The modified agreement specified that the giant would work entirely alone, without assistance from any other being, and would complete the entire project before the first day of summer. If he succeeded within these constraints, he would receive the agreed payment in full. If he failed to meet the deadline even by a single day, he would forfeit all payment and leave Asgardr immediately. The contract included magical enforcement clauses that would automatically implement its terms without requiring further negotiation or interpretation. The giant's acceptance of these modified terms surprised even Loki, who had expected the restrictions to force withdrawal of the proposal entirely. The builder's confidence suggested either supernatural abilities that exceeded normal giant capabilities, or access to resources and techniques that the gods had failed to consider. His calm demeanor during the contract signing indicated complete certainty about his ability to meet the seemingly impossible deadline. Work began with the first snowfall, and the giant's methods immediately demonstrated why his reputation commanded respect throughout the 9 worlds. Rather than quarrying stone from distant locations and transporting it to Asgardr, he convinced the local bedrock to reshape itself according to his architectural vision. His techniques involved lengthy conversations with the geological spirits that inhabited the stone formations, negotiations that addressed their concerns about structural integrity and aesthetic preferences, while securing their cooperation in the construction process. The foundation work proceeded at a pace that defied conventional understanding of construction timelines. Massive stones, each weighing several tons, positioned themselves with precision that would have required teams of skilled masons working for weeks. The giant's hands moved in complex patterns that guided the stones through their positioning, his gestures communicating instructions that the geological spirits translated into physical movement and placement. The walls themselves rose with architectural sophistication that surpassed anything previously constructed in any realm. The giant incorporated defensive features that operated on multiple levels of reality simultaneously, creating barriers that would prove effective against physical assault, magical attack, and dimensional intrusion. The stonework displayed artistic elements that transformed functional fortification into aesthetic masterpiece, with carved reliefs that told the history of cosmic creation while serving as focal points for defensive enchantments. As winter progressed into spring, the gods began to realize that the giant might actually succeed in completing his seemingly impossible task. The walls had reached their planned height along most of the perimeter, while the remaining sections showed steady progress that suggested completion well before the summer deadline. The quality of the construction exceeded even their most optimistic expectations, with defensive capabilities that would indeed provide protection against any conceivable threat. The prospect of actually paying the agreed price created growing anxiety among the divine community. The loss of the sun and moon would affect not merely Asgardr, but all the 9 worlds, disrupting agricultural cycles and navigation systems that countless beings depended upon for survival. Freyja's removal from the divine community would eliminate essential fertility magic that maintained the cosmic balance between growth and decay, creation and destruction. The giant's horse, Svadilfari, proved instrumental to the construction project's rapid progress. This supernatural stallion possessed strength that exceeded normal equine capabilities, while displaying intelligence that allowed him to anticipate his master's needs and respond to complex instructions. The horse could transport massive stone blocks across difficult terrain without apparent effort, while his hooves left impressions in solid rock that served as anchor points for the magical bindings that held the structure together. Svadilfari's appearance commanded attention even among beings accustomed to supernatural creatures. His coat displayed the deep gray color of storm clouds, while his mane and tail moved with wind-like fluidity that suggested elemental connections. His eyes held the same calculating intelligence as his master's, while his movements combined equine grace with the purposeful efficiency of a being designed for specific tasks. The relationship between giant and horse reflected partnership rather than mere ownership, their coordination suggesting years of collaborative work on similar projects. The gods' growing desperation led them to pressure Loki into finding a solution that would prevent the giant's success without violating the terms of their agreement. The trickster's response demonstrated his understanding of both legal technicalities and psychological manipulation. Rather than directly interfering with the construction work, which would have constituted contract violation, he chose to target the giant's primary assistant through methods that fell outside the agreement's scope. Loki's transformation into a mare represented one of his most dramatic shape-shifting accomplishments, requiring complete alteration not merely of physical form, but of behavioral patterns and instinctual responses. His mare form possessed the beauty and allure necessary to attract Svadilfari's attention, while maintaining enough of his trickster intelligence to execute a complex deception plan. The transformation involved assuming not just equine appearance, but the full range of mare behaviors, including scent markers and body language that would communicate receptivity to the stallion's advances. The geological transformations that resulted from giant movements, deaths, and deliberate construction projects created the fundamental landscape features that define the physical structure of the 9 worlds. When giants died, their massive bodies did not simply decay according to normal biological processes, but underwent transformations that converted their physical substance into permanent geographical features. These metamorphoses followed patterns that reflected the deceased giant's nature and abilities, creating landscapes that retained supernatural properties derived from their origins. Mountain formation often resulted from the death or transformation of Bergrisar, whose stone-like bodies provided the raw material for entire mountain ranges. When these giants chose to enter permanent rest, their bodies gradually hardened into living rock that maintained awareness of its surroundings while serving as the foundation for complex ecosystems. The resulting mountains possessed consciousness that could communicate with other geological features and respond to changes in their environment through subtle adjustments to their structure and composition. The Jotunheimer mountain ranges displayed characteristics that reflected their giant origins, with peaks that resembled sleeping faces and ridge lines that followed the contours of massive limbs. These anthropomorphic features were not coincidental, but resulted from the conscious choices made by giants during their transformation process. Many chose to position themselves to provide optimal views of their territories, or to create defensive barriers that would protect their descendants from hostile forces. The giants understood time not as a linear progression, but as an eternal spiral, a cosmic wheel that turned through ages of creation and destruction, growth and decay, order and chaos. This cyclical understanding of existence was fundamental to their worldview and shaped their relationship with both gods and mortals. The JOTNAR were not merely inhabitants of time, but its guardians and interpreters, beings who could perceive the patterns that connected past, present, and future into a single unified tapestry of existence. In the primordial void before creation, time itself did not exist in any meaningful sense. There was only the eternal now of Ginnungagap, the yawning emptiness that preceded all things. When Ymir emerged from the melting ice, time began its first tentative movements, marked by the rhythm of his breathing, the beating of his heart, the flow of his blood. The giants who emerged from his body carried within them this primordial connection to the origins of temporal existence, making them uniquely suited to understand and manipulate the flow of time itself. The concept of the 9 ages was central to giant cosmology. These were not merely historical periods, but fundamental phases in the cosmic cycle, each with its own character, its own lessons, its own role in the greater pattern of existence. The first age was the Age of Ice, when Niflheim's frozen mists dominated all existence and potential lay dormant beneath layers of frost. The second age was the Age of Fire, when Muspelheim's flames brought movement and change to the static world of ice. The third age was the Age of Mingling, when ice and fire met in Ginnungagap, and from their union came the first stirrings of life. The fourth age was the Age of Giants, when Ymir and his descendants ruled over all creation, shaping the primordial landscape according to their will and wisdom. This was the golden age of giant civilization, when their cities stretched across vast territories and their knowledge encompassed all the secrets of existence. The fifth age was the Age of Gods, which began with Odin's rebellion and the slaying of Ymir, when the Aesir and Vanir established their dominion over the 9 worlds and reshaped creation according to their vision. The sixth age was the Age of Mortals, when humans emerged and began to develop their own civilizations, caught between the influence of gods and giants, learning from both and creating something new. The seventh age was the Age of Twilight, the current era in which the old certainties were fading, and the signs of Ragnarok were becoming increasingly apparent. The eighth age would be the Age of Destruction, when Ragnarok would consume the 9 worlds in fire and flood, returning all things to the primordial chaos from which they emerged. The ninth age would be the Age of Renewal, when the surviving gods and giants would emerge from their refuges to create a new world, incorporating the wisdom gained from all previous ages into a more perfect creation. This cycle would then repeat, with each iteration bringing new variations, new possibilities, new opportunities for growth and transformation. The giants understood that this eternal return was not mere repetition but a spiral of increasing complexity and consciousness, each cycle building upon the achievements and learning from the mistakes of those that came before. Certain giants possess the ability to perceive these temporal patterns with exceptional clarity. The Norns, though often counted among the gods, were actually of giant descent, their connection to the primordial forces giving them unique insight into the workings of fate and time. Erd, whose name meant that which has become, could see all of past existence with perfect clarity, understanding how every action and decision had led to the present moment. Verdandi, that which is becoming, perceived the infinite possibilities of the present, the countless branching paths that extended from every choice and circumstance. Skuld, that which should become, saw the future not as a single predetermined outcome, but as a field of probability. Certain events more likely than others, but none absolutely fixed until the moment of their occurrence. Together, the 3 Norns wove the threads of fate at the base of Yggdrasil, their work encompassing not just individual destinies, but the fate of entire worlds, the trajectory of cosmic ages, the ultimate pattern of existence itself. Other giants developed their own methods of temporal perception and manipulation. Some learned to enter trance states, in which they could project their consciousness backward or forward through time, observing past events or glimpsing possible futures. These temporal journeys were not without risk. Spending too long outside one's proper time could result in becoming unstuck from the normal flow of existence, trapped in a liminal state between moments, unable to fully interact with any particular time period. The giant seers who mastered these techniques often returned from their temporal voyages profoundly changed, their minds expanded by the experience of perceiving existence from a perspective beyond normal temporal constraints. They spoke of seeing the 9 worlds as a single, unified structure, existing simultaneously across all time periods, past and future, overlapping with the present in ways that defied normal understanding. They described witnessing the same events from multiple temporal perspectives, seeing how a single action could have different meanings and consequences depending on when and how it was observed. Some giants developed the ability to create temporal anomalies, small pockets of altered time flow where events could unfold at different rates than in the surrounding world. A giant might create a sanctuary where time moved more slowly, allowing for extended periods of study or contemplation, while only moments passed in the outside world. Conversely, they might create zones where time accelerated, causing rapid growth or decay, aging enemies to dust in seconds or bringing crops to harvest in hours rather than seasons. These temporal manipulations required immense skill and concentration, as the fabric of time was not meant to be twisted and bent in such ways. Mistakes could result in catastrophic temporal paradoxes, creating loops where events repeated endlessly, or branches where multiple contradictory timelines existed simultaneously. The most skilled temporal manipulators learned to work with the natural flow of time rather than against it, making subtle adjustments that guided events toward desired outcomes without creating dangerous instabilities. The giants also understood the relationship between time and space, recognizing that the two were fundamentally interconnected aspects of a single cosmic structure. By manipulating spatial relationships, they could affect temporal flow, and vice versa. A giant who could fold space might also compress time, allowing for instantaneous travel not just across distance, but across duration. These space-time manipulations were among the most advanced and dangerous forms of giant magic, requiring a deep understanding of cosmic mechanics and an unwavering will to maintain the necessary mental focus. The concept of temporal echoes was well known to giant scholars. These were events or beings that left such a profound impression on the fabric of reality that they continue to resonate across time, creating ripples that could be detected and interpreted by those with the proper sensitivity. The death of Ymir was the greatest temporal echo in existence, a cosmic trauma so profound that it reverberated through all subsequent ages, influencing events and shaping destinies in ways both obvious and subtle. Giants learned to read these temporal echoes, using them to gain insight into past events and to predict future developments. A skilled echo reader could stand in a location where something significant had occurred and perceive the ghostly impressions of past actions, hearing conversations long finished, witnessing events long concluded. These echoes were not mere recordings, but living patterns that continued to interact with the present, creating subtle influences that shaped current events in accordance with past patterns. The relationship between memory and time was another area of giant expertise. They understood that memory was not simply a record of past events, but an active force that shaped present reality and influenced future possibilities. By preserving and transmitting memories across generations, the giants maintained continuity with their primordial origins, keeping alive the wisdom and knowledge of ages long past. Their oral traditions were not just stories, but living connections to previous cycles of existence, allowing each generation to learn from the experiences of those who came before. Some giants developed techniques for storing memories outside their own minds, creating external repositories of knowledge that could survive even the death of their creators. These memory stones, or memory wells, contained not just information, but the actual lived experiences of those who had contributed to them, allowing future generations to not merely learn about past events, but to experience them directly, seeing through the eyes and feeling through the hearts of their ancestors. Beyond the well-known realm of Jotunheim lay countless other territories inhabited by giants, each with its own unique character, its own culture, its own relationship to the cosmic order. These hidden kingdoms were scattered throughout the 9 worlds, existing in remote mountains, deep forests, beneath the waves, and in dimensions that intersected with but remained distinct from the more commonly known realms. To understand the full scope of giant civilization, one must explore these lesser-known territories and the remarkable beings who dwelt within them. In the highest peaks of the mountains that ringed Midgard lived the storm giants, beings of such immense size and power that their movements could trigger avalanches and their voices could shatter stone. These giants had adapted to life at extreme altitudes, where the air was thin and the cold was absolute. Their bodies had evolved to withstand conditions that would kill lesser beings in moments, their blood running hot as molten rock to maintain warmth in the frozen heights, their lungs capable of extracting oxygen from air so thin it barely qualified as atmosphere. The storm giants built their fortresses on the highest peaks, structures that seemed to grow organically from the mountain stone, blending so seamlessly with the natural rock that they were nearly invisible from below. These citadels served as observation posts, from which the storm giants could monitor events across vast territories, their elevated position giving them a perspective that encompassed entire kingdoms. From these heights, they could see weather patterns forming hundreds of miles away, could track the movements of armies and migrations of peoples, could observe the subtle changes in the land that signaled coming transformations. The storm giants were masters of weather magic, their abilities surpassing even those of Thor, whose thunder was crude and blunt compared to their subtle manipulations of atmospheric forces. A storm giant could summon winds with surgical precision, creating currents that would carry a single leaf to a specific destination while leaving everything around it undisturbed. They could craft storms of incredible complexity, with different weather patterns operating simultaneously in different areas, rain falling in one valley while snow fell in the next and hail pelted a third, all under the direction of a single giant's will. These weather-working abilities made the storm giants valuable allies and dangerous enemies. A kingdom that earned their favor might enjoy perfect weather for crops, with rain falling exactly when needed and sunshine arriving at the optimal moments for growth. A kingdom that earned their enmity might suffer drought or flood, storms that destroyed harvests, winds that toppled buildings and uprooted forests. The storm giants rarely involved themselves directly in the affairs of lowland peoples, but their influence was felt nonetheless, shaping the fortunes of nations through their control of the elements. Beneath the waves of the great oceans lived the deep giants, beings adapted to life in the crushing pressures and absolute darkness of the ocean depths. These giants had evolved forms quite different from their land-dwelling cousins, with streamlined bodies designed for movement through water, bioluminescent organs that provided light in the lightless depths, and sensory systems that could detect the faintest vibrations and chemical traces in the surrounding water. Some had developed tentacles or fins, their bodies taking on characteristics of the sea creatures that shared their environment. The deep giants built cities in the ocean trenches, vast complexes of stone and coral that stretched for miles along the sea floor. These underwater metropolises were home to thousands of giants and countless other sea creatures that lived in symbiosis with them. The architecture of these cities was unlike anything found on land, designed to work with the three-dimensional nature of the underwater environment, with structures extending upward, downward, and in all directions, connected by currents that served as highways for the city's inhabitants. The deep giants possessed knowledge of ocean currents and underwater geography that was unmatched by any surface-dwelling people. They knew every trench and canyon, every underwater mountain range and volcanic vent, every current and countercurrent that flowed through the world's oceans. This knowledge gave them tremendous power, as they could predict and influence events that affected coastal peoples, from the arrival of fish schools to the formation of tsunamis. Some deep giants served as guides for ships, using their abilities to calm waters and direct favorable currents, while others were feared as ship sinkers who could summon storms or create whirlpools that dragged vessels to the bottom. In the deepest forests of the 9 worlds lived the green giants, beings who had become so attuned to plant life that the boundary between giant and forest had become blurred. These giants had bark-like skin, hair that resembled moss or leaves, and the ability to photosynthesize, drawing energy directly from sunlight. They moved through the forests with perfect silence, their bodies blending seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation, making them nearly impossible to detect when they chose to remain hidden. The green giants were the guardians of the ancient forests, protecting the oldest trees and maintaining the delicate balance of the woodland ecosystems. They could communicate with plants, sensing their needs and responding to their distress. When a forest was threatened by fire, disease, or destructive harvesting, the green giants would intervene, using their magic to heal damaged trees, redirect fires, or drive away those who would harm the woodland. They were generally peaceful beings, content to tend their forests and avoid contact with other peoples. But when roused to anger, they could be formidable opponents, commanding the very trees to attack their enemies, causing roots to trip and branches to strike, turning the forest itself into a weapon. The green giants possessed deep knowledge of herbalism and natural medicine, understanding the properties of every plant and how they could be combined to create remedies for virtually any ailment. They shared this knowledge sparingly, only with those who demonstrated proper respect for the natural world and who would use the information wisely. Those fortunate enough to learn from the green giants gained access to healing techniques far beyond what was commonly known, able to cure diseases that baffled other healers and to create medicines of remarkable potency. In volcanic regions lived the magma giants, beings who had adapted to life in extreme heat, dwelling in caves and tunnels within active volcanoes. These giants had skin like cooled lava, dark and cracked, with veins that glowed with internal fire. They could withstand temperatures that would instantly incinerate other beings, walking through molten rock as easily as others walked through water. The magma giants were master smiths and craftsmen, using the natural forges provided by volcanic heat to create works of incredible quality and power. The weapons and armor forged by magma giants were legendary for their durability and effectiveness. They knew techniques for working metal that had been lost to other peoples, methods passed down from the earliest days of creation, when Surt first brought fire to the cosmos. A sword forged by a magma giant would never dull or break, would cut through the hardest materials with ease, and would retain its edge for centuries. Armor crafted by these giants could turn aside blows that would shatter ordinary protection, distributing impact across its entire surface and protecting the wearer from harm. The magma giants also possessed deep knowledge of geology and the inner workings of the earth. They could predict volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, sensing the movements of magma and the shifting of tectonic plates deep beneath the surface. This knowledge made them valuable consultants for those building in volcanic regions, as they could identify safe locations and warn of impending dangers. Some magma giants could even influence volcanic activity to a limited degree, encouraging or suppressing eruptions, directing lava flows away from inhabited areas, or triggering controlled releases of pressure to prevent more catastrophic events. In the far northern reaches, beyond even the coldest parts of Jotunheim, lived the glacier giants, beings of living ice who dwelt in palaces carved from ancient glaciers. These giants were among the oldest of their kind, direct descendants of the first beings who emerged from Niflheim's ice. They had bodies of crystalline ice that never melted, even in the warmest weather, and they radiated cold so intense that the air around them froze into visible crystals. The glacier giants moved slowly and deliberately, their actions measured in seasons rather than moments, their thoughts following patterns as ancient and inexorable as the glaciers themselves. The glacier giants were keepers of the oldest memories, preserving knowledge from the very beginning of time. They had witnessed the birth of the cosmos, had seen Ymir's first stirrings, had observed the entire history of creation unfold. This ancient wisdom made them sought-after advisors, though reaching them was difficult and dangerous, requiring a journey through some of the most inhospitable territory in existence. Those who successfully made the journey and earned an audience with the glacier giants could learn secrets that had been forgotten by all other beings, gaining insights into the fundamental nature of reality and the patterns that governed cosmic existence. In desert regions lived the sand giants, beings who had adapted to life in extreme heat and aridity. These giants had bodies that could store water with incredible efficiency, allowing them to go for months without drinking. Their skin was tough and leathery, resistant to the abrasive effects of wind-blown sand, and they could navigate by the stars with perfect accuracy, never losing their way, even in the most featureless desert landscapes. The sand giants were nomadic, traveling in small family groups across vast territories, following ancient routes that connected oases and other sources of water. The sand giants possessed unique magical abilities related to sand and dust. They could create sandstorms of incredible intensity, walls of wind-driven particles that could strip flesh from bone and scour metal to nothing. They could also use sand for divination, reading patterns in wind-blown dunes or in sand scattered across a flat surface, interpreting these patterns to gain insight into past, present, and future events. Some sand giants could even transform themselves into sand, dispersing their bodies into countless individual grains that could flow like water, passing through the smallest openings and reforming elsewhere. In the twilight regions between worlds lived the shadow giants, beings who existed partially outside normal reality, their forms flickering between solid and insubstantial. These giants had mastered the art of moving through shadows, using darkness as a pathway that connected distant locations. A shadow giant could step into one shadow and emerge from another miles away, traveling vast distances in moments. They could also manipulate shadows, causing them to move independently of their sources, creating areas of darkness in full sunlight, or banishing shadows entirely to create illumination without any visible light source. The shadow giants were often employed as messengers and spies, their abilities making them ideal for covert operations and rapid communication. They could infiltrate the most secure locations, passing through walls by traveling through the shadows they cast, and could observe events without being detected, their shadowy forms blending perfectly with natural darkness. However, their existence between worlds came at a cost. Shadow giants could never fully belong to either the material realm or the realm of shadow, forever caught between, never quite solid, never quite ephemeral, existing in a state of permanent liminality. In underground caverns lived the crystal giants, beings whose bodies were composed of living gemstone, their flesh transparent and refractive, splitting light into rainbow spectra. These giants dwelt in vast cave systems filled with natural crystal formations, forests of stone that grew in the darkness, fed by mineral-rich water seeping through the rock. The crystal giants were master gem cutters and jewelers, able to shape stone with their thoughts, causing crystals to grow in specific patterns or to split along desired planes. The gems crafted by crystal giants had properties beyond mere beauty. They could store magical energy, serving as batteries that could power enchantments for years or even centuries. They could focus and amplify magical forces, making spells more powerful and precise. They could serve as communication devices, allowing those who possessed matched pairs to speak across any distance. The most powerful gems created by crystal giants could even store consciousness, preserving the minds and memories of those who died, allowing them to continue existing in a limited form within the crystalline matrix. These hidden kingdoms of the giants represented only a fraction of the diversity of giant civilization. There were countless other groups, each adapted to their own unique environment, each possessing their own specialized knowledge and abilities. Together, they formed a network that spanned the 9 worlds, a civilization far more extensive and sophisticated than most outsiders realized. The giants were not a single unified people, but a vast collection of related groups, each contributing their own perspective and expertise to the collective wisdom of their kind. The cultural achievements of the giants were as impressive as their magical and physical abilities. Though they were less well known to outsiders, giant civilization had developed rich traditions in art, music, literature, philosophy, and countless other fields, creating works of profound beauty and meaning that reflected their unique perspective on existence. To understand the giants fully, one must appreciate not just their power, but their creativity, their capacity for aesthetic expression, and their deep engagement with questions of meaning and purpose. Giant art took many forms, from monumental sculptures carved from living mountains to delicate paintings created with pigments ground from rare minerals and mixed with enchanted oils. The scale of giant art was often overwhelming to smaller beings. A single painting might cover an entire cliff face, requiring viewers to stand miles away to appreciate its full composition. Sculptures might be hundreds of feet tall, their features visible from distant valleys, serving as landmarks and monuments that dominated the landscape. Yet giants also created works of intimate scale, pieces designed to be held in the hand and examined closely. These smaller works often displayed incredible detail, with surfaces carved or painted so precisely that magnification was required to fully appreciate the craftsmanship. A giant might spend decades creating a single small sculpture, working with tools so fine they were barely visible, creating textures and patterns that captured the essence of their subject with perfect fidelity. The subjects of giant art were as varied as the artists themselves. Some created representational works, depicting scenes from mythology, portraits of notable individuals, or landscapes, capturing the beauty of the natural world. Others worked in abstract modes, creating compositions of pure form and color that evoked emotions and ideas without representing any specific object or scene. Still others created conceptual works that challenged viewers to think differently about reality, pieces that existed as much in the mind as in physical form. Giant music was equally diverse and sophisticated. They had developed instruments of enormous size and power, organs with pipes as large as tree trunks that could produce notes so deep they were felt rather than heard, drums made from hollowed mountains that could be heard across entire realms when struck. The music created with these instruments was correspondingly powerful, compositions that could shake the earth and stir the emotions of all who heard them. But giants also created music of great subtlety and delicacy, using instruments designed to produce sounds at the edge of perception, notes so pure and clear they seemed to come from another dimension entirely. Giant composers understood the mathematical relationships underlying musical harmony, creating compositions based on complex numerical patterns and cosmic proportions. Their music often incorporated elements from the natural world: the sound of wind through canyons, the rhythm of waves against shore, the calls of birds and animals, weaving these natural sounds into sophisticated compositions that blurred the line between music and environment. Giant vocal music was particularly remarkable. Their voices could span ranges impossible for smaller beings, from subsonic rumbles that resonated in the chest to ultrasonic tones beyond the range of normal hearing. Giant choirs could create harmonies of incredible complexity, with dozens or even hundreds of voices weaving together in patterns that seemed to encompass all possible sounds. Some giant songs were said to have magical properties, able to heal the sick, calm storms, or even reshape reality itself when performed correctly. The literary traditions of the giants were equally rich. They had developed multiple writing systems, from runic alphabets carved into stone to flowing scripts painted on prepared hides or woven into tapestries. Giant literature encompassed every genre: epic poetry recounting the deeds of heroes, philosophical treatises exploring the nature of existence, historical chronicles documenting the rise and fall of civilizations, scientific texts explaining natural phenomena, and countless works of fiction exploring imaginary worlds and situations. The epic poems of the giants were particularly notable, vast compositions that could take days or even weeks to recite in full. These epics preserved the history and mythology of giant civilization, passing down knowledge and wisdom from generation to generation. They were not merely entertainment, but educational tools, teaching moral lessons, preserving technical knowledge, and maintaining cultural continuity. Young giants learned these epics by heart, memorizing thousands of lines of verse, ensuring that the knowledge they contained would survive even if all written records were lost. Giant philosophy had grappled with fundamental questions of existence for countless ages. Their philosophers had developed sophisticated systems of thought, addressing questions of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. They debated the nature of reality. Was the physical world the only reality, or were there other dimensions of existence equally or more fundamental? They explored questions of knowledge. How could one be certain of anything? And what were the limits of possible understanding? They examined ethical questions. What constituted right action? And how should one live in a cosmos that seemed indifferent to individual suffering? These philosophical traditions were not merely abstract intellectual exercises, but practical guides for living. Giants applied philosophical principles to everyday decisions, using ethical frameworks to guide their actions and metaphysical understanding to inform their relationship with the cosmos. Different schools of giant philosophy emphasized different values and approaches. Some stressed harmony with nature, others emphasized individual achievement, still others focused on community and collective welfare. These different philosophical traditions sometimes came into conflict, leading to debates that could last for centuries, as giants worked to reconcile competing values and perspectives. Giant architecture reflected their unique aesthetic sensibilities and practical needs. Their buildings were designed to last for ages, constructed from materials chosen for durability and built with techniques that ensured structural integrity across millennia. Giant cities were marvels of engineering, with buildings that seemed to defy gravity, bridges spanning impossible distances, and infrastructure systems that managed water, waste, and other necessities for populations numbering in the thousands or tens of thousands. The aesthetic principles guiding giant architecture emphasized harmony with the natural environment. Rather than imposing artificial structures on the landscape, giant architects worked to integrate their buildings with existing natural features, creating structures that seemed to grow organically from the earth. A giant fortress might be carved from a mountain, its walls and towers shaped from living rock, its chambers following natural cave systems and fissures. A giant city might be built around and through a forest, with buildings woven among the trees, connected by bridges and walkways that allowed the forest to continue growing and thriving. Giant cuisine was another area of sophisticated cultural development. They had developed cooking techniques and recipes that transformed raw ingredients into dishes of remarkable complexity and flavor. Giant chefs understood the chemical and physical transformations that occurred during cooking, using heat, cold, pressure, and time to create textures and tastes impossible to achieve through simple preparation. They cultivated rare ingredients, some of which grew only in the most remote and dangerous locations, and they developed preservation techniques that allowed foods to be stored for years without losing quality. Giant meals were often elaborate affairs, with multiple courses served over many hours, each dish carefully designed to complement those that came before and after. These meals were social occasions as much as nutritional necessities, opportunities for giants to gather, share news and stories, debate ideas, and strengthen social bonds. The preparation and serving of food was considered an art form, with skilled chefs achieving status and recognition comparable to that of great warriors or powerful sorcerers. Giant games and sports provided entertainment and served as training for skills needed in daily life and warfare. They competed in contests of strength, lifting enormous weights or hurling massive stones across vast distances. They tested their endurance in races that covered hundreds of miles across difficult terrain. They demonstrated their skill in combat through wrestling matches and weapon competitions. These contests were not merely displays of physical prowess, but also tests of mental discipline, strategic thinking, and emotional control. Giants also enjoyed games of strategy and chance, developing board games and card games of considerable complexity. Some of these games were used for divination, with the patterns created during play interpreted as messages from the cosmos or glimpses of possible futures. Others were purely recreational, providing mental stimulation and social interaction. The most sophisticated giant games combined elements of strategy, chance, and physical skill, creating competitions that tested players on multiple levels simultaneously. The giants had developed sophisticated systems of education to transmit their accumulated knowledge and culture to younger generations. Giant children underwent years of training, learning not just practical skills, but also the history, philosophy, and artistic traditions of their people. Education was highly valued in giant society, with learned individuals achieving great respect, regardless of their physical strength or magical abilities. The greatest giant scholars were revered as living treasures, repositories of knowledge and wisdom that took lifetimes to accumulate. Giant education emphasized direct experience and apprenticeship. Young giants learned by doing, working alongside masters in various fields, observing their techniques, and gradually taking on more responsibility as their skills developed. This hands-on approach ensured that knowledge was not merely theoretical but practical, that students understood not just what to do, but why and how. The relationship between master and apprentice was considered sacred, with both parties having obligations to each other, the master to teach honestly and thoroughly, the apprentice to learn diligently and respectfully. The cultural exchanges between giants and other peoples were limited but significant. Some giants traveled to the lands of gods and mortals, sharing their knowledge and learning from other traditions. These cultural ambassadors served as bridges between civilizations, facilitating understanding and cooperation. They brought back new ideas and techniques, which were then adapted and integrated into giant culture, creating a dynamic tradition that evolved over time while maintaining continuity with its ancient roots. The approach of Ragnarok cast a shadow over giant cultural life, as it did over all aspects of their existence. Many giants felt a sense of urgency, a desire to create lasting works that would survive the coming destruction and serve as a foundation for the culture of the new world. Artists worked to complete their masterpieces, writers rushed to finish their great works, and scholars compiled comprehensive records of giant knowledge and wisdom. There was a sense that they were working not just for themselves or their immediate descendants, but for future generations who would inherit a world transformed by catastrophe, who would need guidance and inspiration to rebuild civilization from the ashes of the old. Chapter 12. The Legacy of the JOTNAR and the World Beyond Ragnarok. As the signs of Ragnarok multiplied and the final confrontation drew near, the giants turned their attention to the question of legacy. What would survive the coming destruction, and what role would they play in the world that would emerge from the ashes of the old? This was not a question of mere survival, but of meaning and purpose, of ensuring that the wisdom accumulated over countless ages would not be lost, that the sacrifices of the past would serve some greater purpose in the future. The prophecy spoke of a new world that would rise after Ragnarok, a realm cleansed of the corruption and conflicts that had plagued the old order. This new world would be ruled by the surviving gods, Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, Hoenir, who would inherit Odin's gift of prophecy. They would be joined by Balder and Hod, returned from Hel, their deaths undone by the cosmic reset of Ragnarok. These gods would find the golden chess pieces of the Aesir in the grass where Asgard once stood, symbols of the old order that would serve as foundations for the new. But the prophecies also spoke of giants in this new world, though their role was less clearly defined. Some seers foresaw a time when the ancient enmity between gods and giants would finally be resolved, when the two peoples would recognize their common origins and shared destiny. In this vision, giants and gods would work together to build a better world, one that incorporated the best aspects of both traditions, the gods' drive for order and achievement combined with the giants' deep wisdom and connection to primordial forces. Other prophecies were less optimistic, suggesting that the cycle of conflict would continue in the new world, that the fundamental tensions between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness, progress and tradition would reassert themselves, regardless of how thoroughly Ragnarok destroyed the old order. In this darker vision, the new world would eventually develop the same problems as the old, leading inevitably to another Ragnarok, another destruction, another renewal, in an eternal cycle that could never be broken. The giants themselves were divided on which vision was more accurate. Some believe that Ragnarok represented a genuine opportunity for transformation, a chance to break free from old patterns and create something truly new. These optimists worked to prepare for the new world, creating caches of knowledge and resources that would survive the destruction, establishing refuges where giants and their allies could shelter during the worst of the catastrophe, and developing plans for the reconstruction that would follow. Others were more cynical, believing that fundamental aspects of existence could not be changed, that the same forces that had shaped the old world would inevitably shape the new one in similar ways. These pessimists focused on preservation rather than transformation, working to ensure that giant culture and knowledge would survive in as pure a form as possible, unchanged by the catastrophe, ready to be transmitted to future generations exactly as it had been received from the past. A third group took a middle position, arguing that while complete transformation was impossible, meaningful change was achievable. They believed that each cycle of destruction and renewal offered opportunities for incremental improvement, that the new world could be better than the old, even if it could not be perfect. This pragmatic approach focused on identifying specific problems in the current order and developing solutions that could be implemented in the new world, making targeted improvements rather than attempting wholesale transformation. Regardless of their philosophical position, most giants agreed on the importance of preserving knowledge. They created multiple redundant systems for storing and transmitting information, ensuring that even if some repositories were destroyed, others would survive. They carved runes into stone monuments that would endure for ages, wrote on materials designed to resist fire and water, and taught their wisdom to students who would carry it forward in their memories, even if all physical records were lost. Some giants developed magical methods of preservation, creating pocket dimensions where knowledge could be stored outside the normal flow of time, protected from the destruction of Ragnarok. These dimensional archives contain not just written records, but actual objects, tools, weapons, works of art, even living plants and animals, preserved in stasis, waiting for the day when they would be needed in the new world. Access to these archives was carefully controlled, with keys and passwords known only to select individuals who had sworn oaths to use the knowledge responsibly. The giants also worked to preserve genetic diversity, recognizing that Ragnarok would likely result in massive population losses among all peoples. They created seed banks containing samples from every plant species they knew, stored in conditions that would allow them to remain viable for centuries. They established breeding programs for animals, maintaining populations of rare and endangered species that might otherwise be lost. Some giants even preserved samples of their own genetic material, ensuring that the full diversity of giant bloodlines would be available to future generations. The question of who would survive Ragnarok was much debated among giant seers and scholars. The prophecies mention specific individuals, Lif and Lifthrasir, the two humans who would shelter in Hodmimir's wood and emerge to repopulate Midgard. But what of the giants? Would any survive, and if so, which ones? Some prophecies suggested that giants dwelling in remote locations, far from the main battlefields of Ragnarok, would escape the worst of the destruction. Others spoke of giants who would enter magical sleep or stasis, hibernating through the catastrophe and awakening in the new world. Certain giants took active steps to ensure their survival. They built fortresses in the most remote and defensible locations, stocked with supplies sufficient to last for years. They developed magical protections designed to shield against the specific threats of Ragnarok: fire, flood, the breaking of the world. They formed alliances with other beings who might offer shelter or assistance during the crisis. Some even attempted to negotiate with the gods, offering to remain neutral in the final battle in exchange for protection, or at least non-aggression. But many giants rejected the idea of hiding or fleeing from Ragnarok. They saw the final battle as their destiny, the culmination of everything their people had worked toward since the death of Ymir. These giants prepared for war, training intensively, crafting weapons and armor, and making alliances with others who would fight against the gods. They saw Ragnarok not as a catastrophe to be avoided, but as an opportunity to settle old scores, to achieve vengeance for ancient wrongs, to demonstrate the power and courage of their people one final time. The role of Surtur in Ragnarok was particularly significant for giant civilization. As the fire giant who would ultimately destroy the Nine Worlds, Surtur represented both the destructive and creative aspects of giant nature. His flames would consume everything, reducing the old world to ash and cinder. But from that destruction would come the possibility of new growth, new life, new possibilities. Some giants saw Surtur as a hero, the one who would finally break the tyranny of the gods and create space for something new. Others saw him as a tragic figure, doomed to destroy everything including himself, a victim of fate rather than its master. The prophecy of the New World spoke of a hall called Gimel, more beautiful than the sun, roofed with gold, where righteous people would dwell in happiness forever. Some giants wondered if there would be a place for them in this paradise, or if it was reserved exclusively for gods and favored mortals. The question touched on deep issues of justice and redemption. Could giants who had been cast as villains and enemies for so long find acceptance and peace in the new order, or were they forever marked by their association with chaos and destruction, condemned to remain outsiders regardless of their individual actions or character? Some giant philosophers argued that the very concept of a paradise like Gimel was problematic, representing a static perfection that was antithetical to the dynamic, ever-changing nature of existence. They suggested that true fulfillment came not from achieving a final perfect state, but from the ongoing process of growth, challenge, and transformation. In this view, the new world should not be a paradise but a new beginning, a fresh opportunity to engage with the fundamental questions and challenges of existence, to continue the eternal work of creation and discovery. The giants' relationship with fate and prophecy became increasingly complex as Ragnarok approached. On one hand, the prophecies seemed to indicate that the future was fixed, that events would unfold in a predetermined pattern regardless of anyone's actions. On the other hand, the very existence of prophecy suggested that the future could be known and therefore potentially changed. This paradox troubled many giants, who struggled to reconcile their belief in free will with the apparent inevitability of prophesied events. Some giants concluded that prophecy described not what must happen, but what would happen if current patterns continued unchanged. In this interpretation, prophecy was a warning rather than a fixed destiny, showing the consequences of present actions and offering an opportunity to change course. These giants worked actively to alter the prophesied future, seeking ways to prevent or mitigate the worst aspects of Ragnarok, believing that their actions could make a difference, even if they could not prevent the catastrophe entirely. Others accepted the inevitability of prophecy, but argued that this did not eliminate meaning or choice. Even if the broad outlines of the future were fixed, the details remained open, and it was in those details that individual agency and moral choice operated. A giant might not be able to prevent Ragnarok, but they could choose how to face it, with courage or cowardice, with wisdom or foolishness, with compassion or cruelty. These choices mattered, shaping not just individual character, but the nature of the new world that would emerge from the ashes of the old. As the final days approached, many giants found themselves reflecting on the long history of their people, from the primordial emergence of Ymir to the present moment. They thought about the countless generations that had come before, each contributing their own small part to the great tapestry of giant civilization. They thought about the knowledge accumulated, the wisdom gained, the beauty created, the challenges overcome, and they thought about what it all meant, what purpose had been served by the long ages of struggle and achievement. Some found meaning in the idea of legacy, in the knowledge that their actions and creations would influence the future even after they themselves were gone. They took comfort in knowing that the new world would be built on foundations they had helped to lay, that future generations would benefit from the wisdom they had preserved and the preparations they had made. This sense of connection to the future gave their present actions significance, transforming even small deeds into contributions to something larger and more enduring than any individual life. Others found meaning in the present moment itself, in the relationships they had formed, the experiences they had shared, the beauty they had witnessed and created. For these giants, the value of existence lay not in its ultimate outcome, but in its immediate quality, in the richness and depth of lived experience. Whether or not anything survived Ragnarok, whether or not the new world would be better than the old, the fact remained that they had lived, had loved, had struggled and achieved and failed and tried again. That was enough. The final message of the giants to future generations was one of hope tempered by realism. They had learned through long experience that existence was difficult, that suffering and loss were inevitable, that even the mightiest eventually fell, and the greatest achievements eventually crumbled. But they had also learned that meaning and beauty could be found even in the midst of difficulty, that courage and wisdom could transform suffering into growth, that each ending contained within it the seeds of a new beginning. The legacy of the JOTNAR would endure not in any specific achievement or creation, but in the spirit they embodied, the willingness to engage fully with existence in all its complexity, to seek wisdom even when knowledge brought pain, to create beauty even when destruction seemed inevitable, to maintain hope even when prophecy foretold doom. This spirit, more than any physical artifact or recorded knowledge, was what the giants hoped to pass on to the new world. A gift from the ancient past to the unknown future. A bridge across the abyss of Ragnarok connecting what had been with what would be. And so the giants prepared for the end, each in their own way. Some with weapons in hand ready for battle. Others with tools and seeds ready for rebuilding. Still others with songs and stories ready to preserve the memory of all that would be lost. They stood at the threshold of transformation, witnesses to the end of an age and the beginning of another, keepers of ancient wisdom and harbingers of future possibilities, forever the bridge between chaos and order, destruction and creation, the old world and the new.